right now. All right, wonderful. Well, we've got people filing in now. We'll let people kind of join, but let's get started. So hello, everyone. I'm Liz from Course Report, which is a resource for students who are choosing a coding bootcamp. If you haven't looked at Course Report yet, please feel free. I have run Course Report for almost 10 years now, and I'm super excited for this live Q&A today because we get to talk about what is on the horizon for the next year in 2023.
And hi, everyone. I'm Jess. I'm the content manager here at Course Report, and we're so happy to welcome you and all of our panelists today for this live Q&A. These panelists are from all over the bootcamp world, and we can't wait to introduce them.
Yeah, so okay, let's jump right in and introduce everyone. We've got 4 stellar panelists today. We've got Lupe Colangelo, who is the partnerships manager at General Assembly, which means that she is connecting students with employers in UX design, data science, and engineering. Very excited to hear your perspective on getting hired in 2023. Lupe, thanks for joining. And then we've got Ryan Butts, who is the CEO of Coding Temple. And Coding Temple is an online boot camp with a pretty strong focus in software engineering and data, actually. So thanks for joining, Ryan.
Absolutely excited to be here.
Yeah. We've got Colt Steele. Colt Steele works on curriculum design at Springboard and also hosts a wildly popular YouTube channel. If you haven't checked it out yet, you should. So Colt knows what's going on in tech right now. So thanks so much for joining us today, Colt. And then we've got John Kokis, who is the director of curriculum at Code Fellows. Code Fellows is based in the Pacific Northwest, but they also teach remotely. And John has been an engineer for over 20 years and an instructor at Code Fellows for over 5 years. So we're really happy to have John here as well.
Thanks, happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining. So as you can see, we've got curriculum experts, we've got a CEO, we've got Lupe on the employer side. So I'm super excited to see how they're going to answer all of the questions that you asked when you RSVP'd. You asked a lot of great questions.
Yeah, and if you asked a question when you registered for this webinar, we'll pass those on to our panel and we'll continue to take your questions. So be sure to use that Q&A feature on YouTube Live throughout the live panel.
You can see Akash is already using that. Thanks, Akash. So just to get everyone thinking, tell us in the chat, start to talk to everyone in the chat. Tell us where you are in the bootcamp research process. Are you already considering one of the boot camps that are represented on this panel? Use the chat to tell us that.
Yeah, and we'd also love to know your biggest worry about choosing a boot camp in 2023. We're definitely going to touch on layoffs, but we'd love to know what else you're thinking about.
For sure. And then finally, just tell us what kind of job you would hope to land when you graduate. Maybe you don't know exactly what that is right now, but if you have like a dream job that you are hoping to change into, then we would love to know in the chat. And we will keep an eye on that over the next hour, and we'll pitch your questions to the panel too. So feel free to use that liberally. Okay, cool. So let's start by looking back at the trends in 2022. Everyone, tell us like what the most popular course or subject was that was taught at your school last year. And what do you predict that it'll be in 2023?
I can take that one. Liz, as you kind of mentioned earlier, we're known as a software engineering bootcamp. That's kind of been like where our bread and butter has been since 2015. That has definitely been our most popular career track for the last 7 years. We're making great strides in data right now. I do anticipate nothing's going to really change on that trajectory. Software engineering will still be our most sought after career track. The changes I do see in that is kind of just talking with our hiring partners and where their pain points are at. I can see them being the software engineering track going more into a mid-level curriculum. So we're going to be really focusing on actually not just the entry-level curriculum, but really addressing the partners' pain points and seeing how we can do advanced curriculums in the software engineering space.
I'll plus one to Ryan. Our software engineering immersive is definitely our largest program year by year. One of the reasons I think that is because there are so many different pathways you can pursue when you do know how to code, particularly for career changers, which are the biggest population for boot camps. I think when you have those soft skills, you can go into so many different career paths as a developer because of those. But we also, we have a UX design program, a data science immersive, but this year we also started our data analytics immersive, which has been really popular so far. So it's different levels of the data space, but we were really excited to see that program be a success.
Yeah, for us here at Code Fellows, well, 2022 was a record-breaking year for us. We had our highest enrollment since the 10 years we've been open, which is amazing. And I think the modularity of our curriculum, you basically start at the same levels, but they sort of diverge at the advanced courses, and students choose their path at that advanced level. But we're really seeing the biggest growth now in cyber. We launched our cybersecurity program, our ops and securities. That's taken off like a rocket ship. And although it hasn't surpassed software development, our engineering programs, of course, are the number one and will be for a while. But cyber is really starting to accelerate. And I think in the 2023 world, that's where a lot of the jobs are starting to shift, and they're not going away. People aren't going to stop hacking us. And I think that's where I see the trends heading. And that we're very excited to see that grow this year.
And I can add a tiny bit. Although I guess my background is a little different because I'm very much exclusively focused, mostly at least, on software engineering with a little data science, but I'm not working on like cyber curriculum or data analytics. But I can definitely concur with Ryan in terms of seeing from hiring partners, at least, more interest in, I guess, what I would call like the advanced entry level role, where we're still working with a lot of complete beginners, but we're spending a lot more time with them. When I first started teaching boot camps, I was mostly doing like 10 to 12 week, really quick programs. And we've been focusing more on much longer term things, even up to 6 months, where students come out a lot more polished. It just takes them a lot more time. And we've seen a lot more interest in that from hiring partners as well. And then just in terms of my other teaching, I teach courses that are not boot camps, that are just like cheap courses people can enroll in. I'm seeing a lot of interest, in the entry level side of things there, where the commitment is much lower. But in terms of curriculum, I'm sure we'll talk about that later, but it still seems on the software side, React is king and TypeScript is certainly right up there as well. But that doesn't seem like anything all that new anyway. It's just sort of reinforced trend, I guess, is what I would say.
Thanks for mentioning that. Yeah. Well, just to recap, so still seeing software engineering as the most popular, and I think on our end too, we also see software engineering has kind of maintained that popularity, but cybersecurity on Course Report, super popular. People are looking for those courses, and there are definitely more of those this year than there have ever been. So that doesn't surprise me one bit.
And
John.
And Web3 as well. So cyber Web3, the things that are taking hold now, and obviously Web3 is in the news, with the whole thing that's going on. But people want to know, what the hell is an NFT? How do you build those things? How do you live in that world? What is a blockchain? So our entry-level courses in Web3 are starting to gain a ton of interest. It's not quite to where I would say it's accelerating yet, but the interest level certainly there, looking ahead a year. And we just launched that program this year as well. I still think cyber is the surprisingly meteoric in how fast it's growing for us.
Yeah, so John, y'all added Web3 at Code Fellows this year. Will that expand, do you think, next year? Even kind of volatility? Okay.
It's volatile. The Web3 itself is volatile, right? The market for it is not yet sustainable, but there's a lot of interest there. And a lot of it is hiring partners don't really know what to do with it either. So people who want to get into that world don't know what the world is. Companies are like, we should do something with this thing that we don't know what it is yet. And that's where we're seeing it's very, very light treading right now. I think at some point that's going to gain a foothold, and it's going to be a thing that we all might have to do an about face on and really dig into. So I'm stoked that we got started on it this year, and we're seeing a lot of entry level interest, at least some feeling the waters out.
Understanding what that is. Okay, cool. Colt, Iris asked when they RSVP'd, how can you closely match your background with the best route to take in tech? We hear this question a lot because someone who's a beginner may not may see all of these options and be like, well, what, how do I actually choose the path? So are there any like backgrounds that have stood out in your Springboard students or the students that you've taught that like translate to specific careers in tech? We might think about like a psychologist making a great UX designer, but anything else that you're kind of noticing right now?
I think it's a little hard to distill it down to like a one-to-one, if somebody is a firefighter in their previous career, that they're going to be a great, JavaScript developer or something. I'd say in my experience working mostly when I'm working in person with students, you can really get a feel for this, where it's more than just what their previous career was, because not everyone really is picking their first career. You might fall into it. You might be forced into something where it's more important, I think, if someone is good at their job, whatever their previous job was, even if they hate it, that tends to be a pretty good indicator as to whether they're going to be able to thrive as a software engineer. I would say, teachers in particular, I have a soft spot for. I think anybody who has spent time as a teacher tends to be a pretty good student. And you have the empathy that I think is a requirement really to be a good software engineer. So there's other careers that force empathy upon you or require empathy, but I think teaching is probably the main one, the most obvious choice there. But otherwise, I don't think there's an easy one-to-one formula for whether someone will have a good chance at doing well in engineering, other than if they did well at their previous job and if they have some form of empathy. And shout out to teachers.
I imagine that any of sorry, Jess, I keep it
no worries.
I imagine that at any of the boot camps on this panel, if you start the application process, then in talking to instructors and folks in the application or the admissions team, can kind of help you figure out what that perfect, next path is.
Yeah, and I will just add, I think I only answered the second half of that question. In terms of the different career paths, depending on the program, I'm sure everyone here can attest to this and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but certain programs are a lot more entry level, complete beginner friendly than others. Data science in particular is going to have a lot more prerequisites and other skills generally that you're going to have to know ahead of time. Maybe there are some complete entry level data science programs, but it's a lot more work than starting out with, learning web development, for example. But I think the counselors or the admissions staff at whatever bootcamp program are probably the best people to talk to, because they're the ones actually seeing where people are going and how it's working out, and knowing exactly what the curriculum entails at each particular program, and what requirements there are. So yeah, I'd say software engineering is probably on the, UX is probably the easiest to start out with without really having much background. And then software engineering, depending on the program, is going to require some previous experience, and some of them are going to require a lot of experience if they're pretty high level boot camps. But there's also plenty of complete beginner friendly programs as well. So it really just depends on what you're looking for.
Just if I could add one more thing to that, Colt, and just to the rest of the panel, that I don't really think you need to figure out your path and what's going to be the best path for you at the admissions process. The admissions team is definitely going to be your guiding force, and they're going to get to know you, your strengths, your background, but you truly aren't going to know it until you immerse yourself into it. You might be going down the software engineering track thinking you want to be a front-end developer and really fall in love with the back end. So don't go in there thinking like, I need to make this decision now. Just let it happen organically and remember what you got into it for the first place for. So just don't put too much weight on that decision in the beginning, because you don't want that to be something that holds you back.
Well, and I think a follow-up to that for both of you, and Lupe as well, it's what you're predisposed to be good at may not be what you want to do. Like, people choose to change their lives because they're tired of doing architecture work in the construction field. They're tired of doing customer service, which leads you to a front end type of job. They want to change and think differently. Military vets, right? They're very good at sussing out situations and following flow charts, and they're great at cyber, but maybe they want to think a little bit and have some fun. So I think we have to, as boot camps, have to weigh that out. Like, yeah, you're probably going to be really good at this, but the empathetic side of you has to say, well, let's let you explore where you're going to be. And you're right. I think at some point, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks into your camp, you're going to decide, oh, now I know what I really want to do. And I think it's that path to discovery that all of our schools, I think, kind of lead folks down. So don't get shoehorned in, I think, is the advice we're hearing here. Don't lock yourself into a path too early.
Those are all such great insights. So Anna, who RSVP'd, asked this question, I'm going to throw it to Lupe. Anna asked, how can you stand out in an interview when you're just starting out? And to make that question a little bit more forward looking, let's kind of twist it to like, what are technical hiring managers really looking for in 2023?
Definitely. So this is one of the most important aspects of any of our partnerships, because when we speak to hiring managers and hiring teams, it's really helpful to know not only, what they're looking for on paper, but as a whole, what's really going to make a candidate stand out in their hiring process, both from a technical perspective and then from a soft skills perspective. So if you're a job seeker, what I would recommend would be, one, researching the company, but looking for very specific things, right? So if you're looking at the tech stack that they're, looking for a software engineering role, how does that translate to maybe what might be in your portfolio? Or what are you doing in terms of skill building after the course that you graduated from to develop that portfolio? Are you looking for roles that align with the skills that you've already learned? Something that hiring managers are really looking for on the soft skills side would be making sure that upon doing that research and making sure it's aligned, that you're asking thoughtful questions about the company. Are you aligned with their mission? Are you asking thoughtful questions about the projects that they do? Are you asking for feedback about maybe how you can improve your portfolio? Or are you receiving feedback well in the technical interview? Same thing for maybe a UX design challenge. Are you receiving feedback? Are you showcasing how you think? Are you talking to your interviewer for analytics, right? How are you translating the data to non-technical stakeholders? How are you telling a story with the data that you have been doing this work on? So it goes a little bit beyond, can you do the thing that you learned? Even if you're a beginner, that shouldn't discourage you. What hiring managers are really looking for, not just this year, but going into next year, is that combination. Can you tell the story? Can you ask thoughtful questions and do your research? And then can you show not only that you learned this thing and you got the certification and completed it, but how have you been really getting creative? Can you show them how you think with those technical skills that you learned?
Oh, Liz, you're on mute.
Well, I was just going to say, Colt, what do you think? Like, if a software engineer could add one tool to their toolbox in 2023 to be like irreplaceable in their job for thinking about like the technical things you mentioned before, TypeScript and React, are there, like, what would you suggest? That might be a crazy question, but.
Well, you kind of spoiled the answer. I think I would just say, for most of the, I mean, I already mentioned it earlier. So I think I wish I had a better, more exciting, creative answer, but I think what we're seeing most of all is just JavaScript, React, TypeScript are not going to be going away, and TypeScript continues to grow. I don't think that's maybe that surprising, or if anybody, there's a million articles you can find to support any new technology that someone will propose to be the next big React or the next TypeScript or something. But it seems like things have coalesced, at least with what we've seen in hiring. It's pretty slow to change also. Like, companies have to adopt a new technology and then start hiring for that technology. So it can be a couple months or years behind what's actually happening in a given sector in general, right? It's a little harder to say, we want to start teaching what people are going to use next year, but there's not going to be jobs for that necessarily right away. So it's definitely, for me, it would be TypeScript. And that's one area where I think a lot of my students are interested and companies are interested. JavaScript, React, that's been around for long enough where there's not, students, once they get to some level, can teach themselves that. They're already going to be familiar with JavaScript. It's sort of the standard de facto, if not the first thing you learn, it's going to be the second language you learn today at any boot camp. But there's a good amount of students out there who know JavaScript, they know React, but they don't know TypeScript, or they know the basics of TypeScript, but they don't know how to fit it in with React or with Node or some other, bigger stack. So I think there's an opportunity there for a lot of students to pick that up. But I also think some students get too fixated on what is the one technology or the 10 technologies to learn so I can get hired, because you can learn all the TypeScript you want, but you might go work for, a company that is never going to switch to TypeScript, or might in 5 years. And I think it kind of goes to what we were talking about earlier, where there's people want to have a path. They want to feel like they're, on a road that has an exact destination and that they're doing all the right steps. So I do think it's good to try and, broaden your skill set to some extent. There's definitely overkill as possible where people are trying to master Angular and React and something else at the same time. I think it's way better to be good at one thing, be able to get hired. And then if you need to change within that career, if you need to switch teams, if you have to pick up a new language, you want to be able to be flexible. But I think a lot of my students get very hung up on, tell me exactly what to learn right now for next year. And most of the time you're going to interview and they're going to let you pick what language you want to use anyway. They're going to let you pick whatever, framework you want to use even to demonstrate things. So yeah, it's, I think, a human desire to want to feel like you're in control and you've mastered everything and that you're totally prepared. But I think the best way to do that often is just to get good in a smaller area. Anyway, kind of rambling there, but those are my general thoughts.
If I could actually just add a little bit to what Colt just said, like I couldn't help but just hear him saying, skills can be learned, right? Skills can be taught. And it is so true. That is something that can be taught. Character cannot. Drive, motivation, passion. And that is something that I'm not in with like the day-to-day, like Lupe is with actually talking to hiring managers, but I do all the hiring within my company. And all I'm looking for is drive, passion, character. That is going to separate you more than having one specific skill set that's going to separate you from somebody else. Those are the kind of things you can learn on the job. Just make sure you're separating yourself as an individual, because that's ultimately what's going to make you stand out.
100%. I think we call that the it factor. Got to have the it factor to make it work. Bootcamp life is hard. Bootcamp grads are special people. To get through this type of learning, you got to have it, and you're going to have it at the end. I think from a soft skill standpoint, you nailed it. I think from the skill on the actual tech side, though, you got to add Git, you got to add Bash, you got to add you got to be a shredder at your day-to-day process-driven pieces. TDD is a huge thing, regardless of the language. React, Angular, TypeScript, Java, whatever. TDD as a process, Agile as a process, Git, CI/CD workflows. If you can live in the world of a dev from day one, you're going to be valuable from the moment you walk in the door. Because I can teach you any language I want to teach you, but if you can't get the work done, I think that's another thing that boot camps, all of us, I think we focus so heavily on those process bits, and that can't be replaced. I think coming in day one, able to do work and having that passion that you're talking about there, Ryan, I think it's huge. That's the secret sauce. Yeah,
that's such great insight on that. And John, I wanted to know a bit about the Code Fellows 401 job data. Which grads are most employed or even highest salaried that you're seeing there?
Right. Well, the highest salaries, it's regional. Now that we've had to, kind of live through COVID, used to be we were a Seattle-based local, coding school. And now we're opened up worldwide. So we're seeing the job data. Our numbers are the same. It's 93% hire rate and 90% retention rate after a full year, which is amazing, I think. The salaries are up and down based on where you live and if you're remote or not. Companies now are paying remote staff local remote wages. So, a dev in Redmond at Microsoft used to make 180. Now that same dev who moved to Missoula is making 67. So the numbers don't actually match what they used to match, and it's kind of hard to tell. But yeah, we're seeing students who go to the FANG companies are making great money out of the gate. The cyber students are making great money out of the gate. Approaching 80 to 90 starting salaries. But again, regional. It's tough to tell. The thing that we're most excited about is the retention rates. Like our students are staying employed. It isn't like they got a job because they learned the one thing to get the job, like you're talking about, Colt, and flamed out after a year. They're able to live in the world for a long time. And I think that it factor, and I think, the ability to learn, like knowing how to learn, which is what boot camps sort of teach you, that skill really goes through.
So regionality is important. And then you're noticing strong salaries in cybersecurity. Yeah, I'm just curious, like any other particular 401 programs? And just for anyone watching,
Yeah.
401 is like y'all's kind of advanced boot camp.
It's our advanced
Like,
courses. So in our
right.
school, we have a 201 and a 301 that basically gets you through web development. Web development, mean stack, between them, they're about 10 weeks. The 401 is another 10 to 12 weeks. And we focus you in on the coding side anyway, on Java, C#, Python, or JavaScript. And those four main technologies, again, we're following Indeed. We're looking at what's being hired for and paid out there. And you can see like nationwide, right now, there's about 19,000 open Python jobs that average about $114,000 a year. Now, again, that's going to be senior to junior spread there. JavaScript is over 30,000 jobs open right now. So I know we're all concerned about the hiring freeze, but we're looking at that data and we have ample room to place students. And that's what we're seeing on the average. Again, regional aside, those four main technologies. And again, our students can pick one of those paths. And again, like we said earlier, you might find along the way in 301 that, hey, I think I really am digging this backend thing, or I really want to work in the cloud. Let me go switch over to Python instead of what I was going to do. And that lets you sort of pick your path, so to speak. And then, like I said, we're seeing those are the four main technologies that are where all the jobs are. There's higher paying jobs in Rust and Groovy and other things, but there's no jobs. So we're very much, I'm sure Lupe would agree. We're looking at Indeed and Monster, like who's hiring for what, and that's where we're tailoring things, because you want to make the funnel, the reverse funnel, and get students out there where the jobs are.
Definitely. I think any of us can agree with, the past couple of years, it's very hard to predict exactly where the market's going, but the best feedback we have is just, staying connected with our hiring communities and hearing from candidates and also alumni who have been, going through and maybe now are hiring managers. So I think just staying connected and being agile and understanding that we might not be able to predict where the skills and where the trends are going, but we can definitely make sure that we're agile enough to meet those needs.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about like regionality, and Ryan, Coding Temple has a pretty strong presence in Chicago historically, but has moved fully to remote learning since 2020, like a lot of boot camps have. And from what we've talked about, I think that's been pretty successful for y'all. So how do you predict, what do you predict for remote learning and working in 2023? Are we headed back to any kind of in-person anytime soon? And as Ryan answers this, I'm going to put a poll live for everyone tuning in, just asking, like, what's your preferred modality? Would you rather attend a boot camp online or in person in 2023? And if it's online, then think about, like, would you rather attend a boot camp that has live instruction or totally self-paced? I'm super curious about this. So here, I'll put this live now.
Sure. Let me be the first person to say, in 2020, when nobody knew what was going on, I was freaking out, just as anyone here on this panel was, right? Like, you had no idea what was going on. I'm very old mindset in the sense of, I think in-person relationships is the way to go. That's the best way to meet people. That's the best way to get rapport. That's the best way for sales, anything. That's just how you build relationships, right? So you'd think that way of learning has to be superior, right? There is so many new pros that we have found out as an industry to remote learning that completely outweighs, in my opinion, the in-person experience. For on the bootcamp side, as a company side, expenses are lower, so it's going to keep the tuitions a little bit lower for students. You don't have as much overheads. Obviously, again, on the company side, we are now open to a talent pool of employees that can be national. So now we have like no limits to our physical footprint, and as well as we're now no longer landlocked to our physical location. So now we're open to students. On the flip side, the student advantage to that is now they are also not landlocked to the boot camp that is physically next to them. The boot camp that is right next to them might not be the best fit for them. So now the student has the advantage to explore other opportunities. The tuition is going to be lower. They are going to be learning in a remote space, which they will also most likely be hired for in a remote space. So they've already proved that they can learn this way. And they are also not landlocked to the companies hiring them that are like physically near them. So now you put all of that together, I don't see a reason why the bootcamp industry as a whole would fully ever go back to an in-person learning method only. Now, I'm not saying people aren't doing it, other camps aren't doing it. I'm also not saying it's not successful, because it obviously is. This bootcamp industry isn't 2 years old, but I'm saying the pandemic has definitely pushed us on a path. Employers, boot camps, the global workforce outside of the boot camps, to adopt a remote learning and a remote hiring way. Like, that's just the way it's going to be. If you cannot accept that, then it's going to be very difficult to get great talent as a company. And I think companies are starting to understand that. You have some big 4 accounting firms that are as straight-laced as you can be, wear a suit and tie to work. Now, like, that is not what's happening anymore. And that's not even a tech sector job. So I think the bootcamp industry going remote is here to stay. It's going to evolve. It's going to, we're still evolving with it. Tools are becoming better. New companies are coming out as far as helping people get hired. And, we're all adapting, and it's honestly been so good for the student that I think the bootcamp industry has grown more in the last 2 years than it hasn't since 2013.
Yeah, so we're looking at our poll right now, and it looks like all of the attendees are really interested in learning online through live instruction or self-paced. So Ryan, how about live instruction versus asynchronous learning?
So to me, that's obviously that's to me is a very, very cool next evolution of the bootcamp. It just has to be. You take the going from the live model to the remote model, and then going to the remote model to async. Somewhere in the middle of remote learning and async is this beautiful synergy of the bootcamp experience and what the bootcamp is all about. Accountability, community, one-on-one support, career services, and figuring out how to blend everything that is so sought after and desirable about a bootcamp into a hybrid async experience that actually has career support and it actually can get you job ready. There's something super cool there. And I do believe we're going to see a lot of shift into that space. Whether it's for new boot camps, so entry level boot camps, or skilling up. I can see companies coming to boot camps being like, hey, your curriculum is amazing, your accountability is amazing, your internal LMSs are awesome. Like, we want to utilize everything you guys have, but we want to license it out from you, and those kind of things. So there's a ton of different options. I see that going. Obviously, Colt on this board right here, he's taught hundreds of thousands of developers through Udemy courses, but he's definitely not done hundreds of thousands of one-on-one sessioning and grading and papers and accountability checks and portfolio checks and capstone project checks. So having that individualized attention that a bootcamp can give, I think that is a super cool opportunity. And I definitely see the industry focusing and moving that way in the next couple of years.
I would quickly add, beyond the bootcamp space, when we think about employers and those trends and our jobs going remote, are they going to be in person? We're seeing a little bit of both, and it really depends on the company. But one point to add is, for job seekers who might be listening to this call, you now have more freedom and flexibility to, negotiate on your behalf based on what type of working style is going to work for you, especially from a diversity perspective. So even though on this call, we're all important stakeholders in the tech space, we don't necessarily represent, the diversity of the bootcamp space. And there are a lot of great diverse talent in the bootcamp space. And remote work is a benefit that supports diversity initiatives. So you should be asking your employer, maybe remote work is not for you, but if it is, if it's not, if you require in-person work, those are things that candidates feel more comfortable advocating for, because it helps companies reach their diversity goals. Stay-at-home parents, caregivers, folks who are differently abled, those are all candidates that are really important in the ecosystem. And so what this has done is kind of forced hiring teams to say, are we accounting for the diversity that we really want? How can we use remote work or in-person work as one of the many benefits that can support that talent?
Thank you for bringing that up, Lupe. That's a super important point, and one of the great benefits of remote work. And then I know, like, some boot camps. Oh yeah, sorry. Go ahead, Colt.
Sorry. I was just going to add on to what Ryan was saying. In terms of asynchronous versus live instruction or a hybrid model. And
yeah, you have experience with both.
Without giving my whole life story, I mean, I started doing exclusively live instruction, and I wanted to be a teacher way more than I ever wanted to be a developer, have anything to do with software. So that's where I started, and there's a lot of pros to that, and there's a lot of cons, both for the teacher and the teacher's life teaching boot camps, but also for the actual students. And it can cause a lot of challenge. It can be very difficult, right, for the average person in the middle of the country to fly to wherever to enroll in a boot camp, rent a place with like 10 other people on bunk beds and try and get a job. So I left and I started making courses online, complete opposite model. It's not a boot camp. What I started doing, I just made basically cheap courses to get anybody who had any interest in the door, or at least get started, where there's really no support. I mean, I have teaching assistants who help answer questions, but there's no live anything. Nobody's looking at your work. No one's grading you or, helping with career support. And then in recent years, I've kind of merged those together, I guess you could say, with Springboard. And there's other programs that have this model that are almost exclusively asynchronous, but with those live and the live aspects and the checks on your work, the checks on your, something holding you accountable, because that is what I would say the biggest aspect of attending an in-person program or a live program. The most important piece is, for me, the accountability, the camaraderie, the aspects of feeling like you're in a community. But for most people, it comes down to making sure they're actually participating and doing the work, which if you enroll in one of my courses that you buy on Udemy, no one's going to do that. It's all up to you. And so we get some highly motivated individuals who do that, but then we also get a lot of people who buy it on New Year's. Their resolution is to learn to code, and they start for, an hour and then get distracted, which is natural. I mean, it happens to me all the time with anything I'm trying to learn. So I do think a hybrid model works. I wouldn't say best for everyone, but for some people, it works really well because you have the flexibility of schedule, which is the most important part, I think, for the average person. In order for them to complete and stay on track and stay motivated, they have to be able to attend in a way that makes sense for their life. If they have kids, if they have a part-time job, if they have something else going on, well, like 8 or 10 hours of live video instruction or in-person instruction doesn't fit with everybody. Even though that's what I started out teaching, we ended up usually having like young 20 and 30-year-old people in there who were trying to start their career. They didn't have kids. They didn't have a mortgage. They didn't have, a lot going on. They could be in a classroom all day. But at Springboard, a lot of the students that we work with now are kind of busy and they have stuff going on. They have commitments. They have a real life that gets in the way of a lot of other things. And so I do think the hybrid model, I'm not going to go out and say it's necessarily the best way to teach any topic, but I do think it allows for the most number of students to attend. And in order to do it right, you do have to have a lot of checks. You have to have accountability. You have to have grading. You have to have career support. Otherwise, it ends up like some of my other, a Udemy course, for example, where it's great to start, but you've got to be self-motivated to get anything out of it. So I think we'll see more hybrid model going forward, or more aspects sort of bleeding into each other, where you won't have only in-person or only live video instruction all day, or only self-directed, self-paced instruction. I think the middle ground is probably where most people will, and most programs will end up moving.
I think
got to agree with that. Yeah. And well, John, I'm glad you're waiting, because there are also still some reasons for a boot camp to have an in-person classroom, right? For someone, a boot camp like CodeFell works with a lot of veterans or accepts the GI Bill, like you got to have an in-person
We've got both
classroom. Yeah.
We do both.
Right.
And I think the danger to me of fully asynchronous, and we've explored this too, is like you're saying, the accountability is part of it, right? But coding and tech in general is a shoulder-to-shoulder sport. Right. So we gave up some of that when we left campus because we had to, right? You had no choice. You're going home. And so you replicate shoulder to shoulder by some technology, whether it's Gather or whether it's Remo or some other community-based platform that students can work together on projects all day long and have that same sense of working side by side as a team. The async piece takes that away. I think asynchronous as a backfill or as an option here and there makes a ton of sense. But I think as a replacement, we need to go from in-person learning where you're literally shoulder to shoulder to virtual shoulder to shoulder to I'm on my own between naps. That becomes a tougher way to kind of jump into the world. So I think you're right. Hybrid, what the mix of that and the blend looks like, I think is tough to figure out. But I lean way more towards team, keep people together, working 4 screen sharing at the same time, having support, being mentors to each other. in real time, because that's what the industry needs. That's how you work in real life. I want to mimic that as much as we can. So I don't know what the balance is, Colt, but I think you're kind of hitting on there's a need for it, but I don't want to keep lowering the bar from in-person to remote to async to, reading books like I did when there was no internet. You know what I mean?
Well, from our perspective, it sounds like everyone is working on this. Maybe we don't have we're not quite to the point where like everything is hybrid or everything is synchronous async, but everyone is working on this. So it's on everyone's mind. Okay, so I want to make sure that we get to this question because it is truly the most asked question that we got from people RSVPing. Lupe, let's throw this to you first. So Justin and really so many others asked, how can you expect to get a job in tech with the recent layoff trends? This is a big question. It's a very nuanced topic, but how do you think that this very recent news will kind of really impact boot campers?
Yeah, great question. And it's definitely very scary to think about, especially if you are considering a career change on a job search. I think everyone here can empathize with the fact that it's terrifying to consider maybe different job prospects than you might have had in the past. At the same time, we've been through this. I think in 2020, we saw the craziest job market and so much volatility. And, it was devastating to see people that I was coaching personally get, hired and then laid off 2 weeks later in that spring. That was really devastating. And we saw a lot of people really struggle. One of the things that some of the lessons we learned during that time, which we're applying now, is to really focus on what everyone can control, right? What industries are continuing to grow, because not everything shuts down in a recession, right? There are different ebbs and flows in the industry. So we encourage folks to focus on the industries where they're seeing growth. I'll plug Course Report because staying on top of trends and reviews and, what is really popular is not just, a fun thing to do for people in this field. It's an essential. You have to be plugged into the trends when things are changing very quickly. Really focusing on skills, portfolio building, networking, right? So it's not enough to see what jobs are open, but really talking to people and understanding where their teams are hiring. What are the entry-level pathways in certain jobs? If they're in a hiring freeze, having those connections to say, hey, we're hiring again 3 months later. That's not to say it's not very hard to find a job, but for some folks, it might take a little bit longer. For some folks, it will happen in the same amount of time. So there's no real way to predict how it might affect you. But as a job seeker, I'd really encourage people to do their research, focus on what they can control, build those skills, freelance if possible. That's such a great way to mitigate any, struggles during a recession, is learn how to be a freelancer. And lean on the support that you're getting if you've taken one of our programs. I know GA has some excellent career coaches. I know all these programs with reps here have supports in so many different ways and might be different, might be similar, but they all have amazing support. So if you've taken one of our programs, make sure you're using the resources that you have.
Anyone can weigh in here too. Is this a good time for a career change? What do y'all think?
I'd love to jump in on that one and just echo Lupe's sentiment is do not let the noise freak you out or stop you from achieving your goals. I talked about this earlier. Skills can be taught, drive, passion, all that cannot. You have to go out there and put in the work, push forward. Job searching isn't fun in a booming economy. So you just have to keep doing what you're doing and not let any of this, every main company is laying off 40% of their workforce headlines freak you out from starting to do what you love and pursue your dreams. That is the whole point of this. You're going to do this to change your career, right? You're going to do this to change your life, to better yourself. So my advice is just to go after and not let that be a reason that's going to scare you. Sure, you could see yourself being in a longer job hunting period, but at the same time, you're going to be getting stronger. You're going to be building your relationships. You're going to be building your LinkedIn, your networking, your personal brand, all of those things. So I would just say, yeah, it's actually even going back to John's earlier statements, go look at the data on Indeed, go look at the data on Monster. It's there is demand. A lot of these layoffs are senior, high paying people. It's not like they're restructuring from the ground up. So again, there's just way more that it's not just black and white. It's not just hey, everyone's getting rid of people. The economy goes on, things are still happening. Everyone's just not working anymore. That's just not realistic. So just just stay focused, stay motivated, and stay positive.
Well, and it's like, the news, it's the news, right? 10,000 layoffs at Amazon makes the news, but Amazon laid off 10,000 people from a team or a project that was losing $5 billion a year. Well, they're going to lay those people off and close that project down. The cloud's not getting any smaller. Amazon's also hiring 12,000 cloud developers in the next 18 months, right? So let's not lose, the forest to the trees kind of a thing. Also, all the tech jobs aren't at FANG companies. Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook. There's 100,000 companies that have 20 employees or less that need web developers. Citibank, Amex, all these other companies need people. It isn't just the 4 that you read about. They get the headlines. And I think in our local job market here, there's so many jobs at smaller T-Mobile, smaller company compared to Amazon, hiring all the time. Because our cell network's going away? No, they're just growing, right? Our app's going away? No, they're growing. There's tons of jobs out there. It's just that you read about the nightmare scenario. I'm old enough to have lived through 9/11. I owned a software company back then, right? We survived it. We had a year and a half of almost no software sales and everybody laying everybody off. Guess what? Came right back up again, didn't it? It always comes back. 2008 market crash, same thing. We lost everything, built it back up again. We are an industry that's not getting any smaller, but I do think the industry realized that there were a lot of people who weren't getting a whole lot done at home. And some of this layoff is a little bit of that. And I don't think bootcamp grads ever fall into the trap of not being hard workers. You're not going to be the folks that get laid off because you didn't put your time in. You're going to give a company a solid 7.5 from your house versus a solid 3 that a lot of people were giving. And I think that's why I'm all in on the bootcamp thing. I think students who come through our programs are rock stars because of that it factor we talked about earlier. So make that, I think Lupe said earlier, like the soft skills that you need to get a job, like you sell that. When you come into the workforce, yeah, I can code a little bit. Yeah, I'm not afraid to fail, but man, I got this. That gets you the work over somebody else who just may not have put in the effort. So encouragement to the folks in the audience. That matters. It matters a whole lot, especially when the market's down. People want workers, not watchers.
And I'll just add on to basically what everyone said. I think, well, especially what John got to at the beginning around, it's not just these big FANG companies or even just big, tech startups that are where these jobs are. I mean, there's a lot of, in the cultural sort of zeitgeist, I guess that's what everyone, or a lot of people dream of or want, this paid free lunches and a huge office like in downtown San Francisco or something. But I think what I've seen with my students, and this is not limited to Springboard students, but any of my students, the majority of them are going to tech roles that at companies you might not even think about, American Express, AT&T, T-Mobile. I wouldn't say the majority of them are going to those companies specifically, but they're going to companies that are going to be around for a long time and that have to have engineers. There's no way around it. And the whole reason I think our industry exists is that every industry needs engineers. And that's not going to change anytime soon. Now, I'm not an economist. I have no idea what will happen in the short term. But I can say just anecdotally, even some of my friends who are those high-level engineers who have been laid off from Facebook, from smaller companies like Airbnb, they have rebounded just fine. It's not like there is no place for them to go either. And they're much higher paid. They're more senior, they're more demanding. And this time of year, it can get a little doom and gloomy generally with the hiring market. I think between Thanksgiving and Christmas, New Year's is kind of slow. A lot of places just freeze hiring anyway. So I think in general, once 2023 rolls around, I'm not going to make a prediction and say that it will resume back to normal, but in my experience, it's easier to get hired after the new year anyway, where more companies have a new budget and they're starting to hire and look towards Q1 and figure out what's happening with the rest of the year. And then the other thing I would say is that choosing to change careers is not a 1 year or 6 months commitment, right? It's something that you are choosing to do for the long haul. And maybe that might be 5 or 10 years. Like I've certainly hopped around in what I've done in my life, and a lot of people do, but generally you're making an investment in yourself. And if the market is rough for a year or two, for most people will still be able to ride it out and find a job anyway. But the whole concept is that this is something you're going to do long-term. And, if you're making a little bit less for the next year or two, but you end up making $150,000 for the rest of your life or more, you're on a path that you're trying to get on. And it's not a window that closes after a year. So I think that's also important to consider when you're investing all the money and the time, and most importantly, the work to basically reinvent yourself or start a new career. That is a long path. And so I think it's easy to look at the super short term and get discouraged. And again, I'm not an economist, so maybe we're in for like the world's worst recession and all companies go away and all jobs stop hiring, but I highly doubt that's going to happen.
Somebody has to make the Terminator robots, right? That's happening.
Lupe, do you want to just Lupe, will you share in the live chat? Actually, I think John had mentioned this. Your favorite recruiters, freelance companies, like you were talking about before, that would be super helpful. We can put it in the blog post too.
Yeah, no problem. I will throw some in the chat, but just out loud, I think even beyond agencies, I would recommend folks look into different Slack communities for your respective fields, because there are a lot of peers, mentors, opportunities, contract gigs, recruiters in there. So rather than maybe focus on one for this conversation, Google Slack communities. There are so many really awesome ones. And a lot of, folks find contract roles through those just by networking.
Amazing. Okay, cool. Well, I would love to talk about this specific topic forever. We're going to transcribe this afterwards, and Jess and I will pull out a bunch of tips, because y'all have given very concrete tips that people can take away. So really appreciate that. Okay, let's move on to some bootcamp predictions.
Yeah, I mean, so far we've touched on job prospects, specific languages to learn, soft skills. Like Liz said, let's in these last few minutes kind of open it up to what are your predictions for the bootcamp world. Liz and I were just recently talking about another school going after a more traditional accreditation. So wondering if that's one of the things that you're predicting for 2023.
Sure, I can start. I think maybe rather than focusing on one element of, what we see coming in the next year, I think one of our focuses that we really want to highlight have been our strategic partnerships, where, I think, and everyone in this room is doing some of that in their own way and in their own directions. But we've been really excited to just see where those have gone, because it doesn't necessarily put us into a box of, this is how a bootcamp is supposed to interact with an employer, and this is how you recommend someone to a job. I think we've been really agile, and I think that's one of the directions that we really are excited to going into the next year is, how can we maybe form a partnership that hasn't been done before? How do we, solve the needs of these, diverse job seekers with an employer who can help them out, and vice versa? How can we really help employers, fill their, diversity initiatives and get really excited about hiring people from non-traditional backgrounds? But I think we're really excited to just kind of get out of a box of what has traditionally been done and say, how can we, do this based on skills, do this based on candidate feedback, what's really popular with the workforce, and how can we kind of advocate for that with the employers?
Lupe, can you give us an example of a strategic partnership? Do you mean an employer would sponsor a cohort at General Assembly, and then somebody attending this live Q&A could take that for free? What are
totally? Well, we've done that. That has been
That's cool.
If we have those opportunities for people to kind of raise their hand, they're usually on our site for people to sign up for. But one example maybe of a strategic partnership would be when we did in Buffalo, where we were able to support folks from the local community with a few different employer partners to keep talent in the Buffalo area. And so they really wanted to invest in local talent during a time where a lot of folks were going remote. So we were able to kind of pull a lot of strings and network really heavily in the community and get people trained to be technical talent in the local area. So we were really excited about that.
Very cool. Let's go Buffalo. John, what kinds of public-private partnerships do you think will flourish in 2023? I know I mentioned before, working with veterans. I know CodeFellows accepts vet tech. A lot of the schools on this panel do. Do you think it's becoming easier, harder to use workforce development dollars? What do you see there?
We're seeing, well, so I'll tell you, the government's fun to work with, as you all probably know. Getting GI Bill funds to trickle through during COVID was very, very difficult, but we managed it. Vet Tech is an amazing program. We worked with Apprenti as well. We've done a number of cohorts that are full apprenticeship cohorts that come through. We've had a couple of local businesses like Lupe is mentioning, bring a whole group of folks through to level up like an entire team. That's been a great partnership. But I think looking forward at 2023, what do I think about boot camps? I think, and you guys can hopefully all give me the thumbs up on this, boot camps are getting more recognized. Like used to be like, oh God, another boot camper, let's put them on the lowest level CSS team and make them just do code reviews all day long. Now boot campers are being seen as, hey, let's get some of those folks in our company. I think we are cresting this mountain of respect in the tech field. I think that people are seeing that, yeah, a job changer actually has marketable skills and they're bringing in previous life skills. And I think that we're doing a great job, all of us, of leveling them up. I think the big thing, my prediction for 2023 and beyond is boot camp grads are going to be sought after, not settled for. That's what I'm seeing. And I've been at this now for, better part of 6 years. Our company's been around for 10 years and it's been kind of a struggle, right? You're fighting that stigma. That's gone. I think the stigma's gone. And I think that working with the vets like we do, and I think the apprenticeship tie-ins that we have, it's changing the conversation. And I think credit to all of us for changing the conversation. How else can you meet a diversity goal at any company or in this industry if we don't become that agent for change? And I think that we've all done a great job. And that's where I see it going.
I agree with John generally about boot camps and the stigma maybe decreasing. And I certainly, when I first started teaching, which somehow I think it was before you, John, but back in San Francisco in 2014 or so, 2013, 2014, we had a lot of backlash at the beginning for our students. They got hired. We actually had really good hiring stats back then when we had to place like 10 people every 3 months. It was pretty easy back then. But I think it's not a matter of society or hiring companies, or it's not exclusively a matter of hiring companies feeling more positively about boot camp grads. I think also boot camps have just gotten better. And there were a lot of pretty terrible boot camps, and there have been historically. I'm not going to name names or anything, but I think people viewed it as like a gold rush at one point. Hey, here's this industry. You can basically know how to code and be a terrible teacher, and you can start a boot camp and charge people 20 grand. And that works well enough when you don't have much competition. But I do think now things are pretty competitive, and some boot camps have folded. Others have really improved their curriculum, improved their outcomes, like improved in every possible way to help eliminate some of that stigma as well. So I think it's from both sides, right? Like outcomes have gone well, people feel better about it. But also the worst programs have either improved or gone away. And all programs, I think, have gotten better because you have to. And I think that will continue to happen. It's no longer enough to be like, you can't be the one program in your metro area, because people can take a course anywhere, right? They can pick the best of the best. It doesn't have to be the one program in Kansas City that they could attend in the past.
Well, I would certainly say that is the case for, oh, sorry, Ryan, do you want to finish? We have 1 minute left.
I can wrap this up.
Everyone. Okay. Yeah,
I can wrap this up and under that. I just wanted to just add to what John said. The stigma is gone. It really, truly is. He said it earlier, workers, not watchers. Going to steal that offline, but remember, it's workers, not watchers. The bootcamp graduates, they have really just drank it from a fire hose. They learn how to adapt. They are very hardworking. They are sought after. Now, 5 years ago, I was begging to get into university partnerships, and traditional academia laughed at us. We are now getting emails, weekly calls, weekly everything to say, how do we do these post-secondary graduates? The industry is completely different than it was 3 to 4, 5 years ago. And bootcamp graduates, the stigma, it's gone. It truly is.
Well, y'all, that was wonderful. I was going to ask if everyone could give their quick last advice before we wrap up, but honestly, I think y'all have given tons of tangible tips, things
Mhm.
that people can take away throughout this. So we, like I said, we will transcribe this, we'll pull out all of your tips, we'll put them in a nice like infographic so everyone can take that away. But yeah, I think y'all have given everyone great keys to success in 2023. So that is the perfect place to wrap up. Thanks to everyone who tuned in, and to all of our panelists. We can't thank you for being here enough and sharing your predictions for 2023. We are going to post this video on the Course Report blog right now, and then we'll send it to everyone that RSVP'd in a follow-up email later today. And I should also just point out that Course Report has scholarships live available for General Assembly, Coding Temple, and Springboard. So I'll include instructions to apply to those. It takes like 1 minute. You should definitely do it if you're going to go to one of those schools. So yeah, thanks so much for all of your questions. We're going to do more of these live Q&As next year. So let us know in the comments or email us hello@coursereport.com. Let us know if there's a specific topic that you want us to dive into, and we will do that. Thanks everyone for joining.
Thanks, everyone.
Everyone.
Thank you.